Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're jumping headfirst into a topic today that hits uncomfortably close to home for, well, probably everyone listening.
Absolutely. It's that universal struggle, isn't it? Knowing exactly what you should do for your long-term well-being.
And then doing the exact opposite in the moment.
Exactly.
Precisely. Why is it so incredibly hard to save that money or, hit the gym or finally tackle that tough project when we know it's the smart thing?
And why do we cave to that immediate urge, that temptation?
It's the classic maddening problem of procrastination and, well, self-control.
It really is that internal battle, your best intentions versus your worst impulses.
And for this deep dive, our source is incredibly illuminating. Chapter 6 of Dan Ariely's fantastic book, Predictably Irrational, The Hidden Forces That Shape Our Decisions.
Great book.
It really is. Our mission today is basically to unpack the surprising psychological forces behind this struggle.
And explore some of the fascinating examples and maybe potential solutions Ariely presents.
We're diving into the predictable ways our rationality just kind of goes out the window when temptation calls.
Yeah, the predictable irrationality.
Okay, let's unpack this by setting the scene first.
Yeah.
Because Ariely starts with a really stark picture of just how big this procrastination problem is.
Mm-hmm. Not just for individuals, but like on a massive scale.
Right. He points to some truly eye-opening data from the U.S., especially around personal finance.
Yeah, he highlights the dramatic drop in the U.S. personal savings rate. If you think back, like 25 years ago, double-digit savings rates were common.
Right.
By 94, it was still hovering near 5%. But then, incredibly, by 2006, it plunged below zero.
Below zero.
Negative 1%. Meaning, yeah, on average, people were spending more than they actually earned.
That's staggering. And he contrasts that with, Europe averaging 20%, Japan at 25%, China up at like 50% savings rate.
Huge difference. So what's driving this seemingly uniquely American trend?
Well, Ariely points to two main things. One is just rampant consumerism.
Yeah.
Chasing bigger, better, newer, everything.
Okay, I definitely felt personally attacked by his description of those walk-in closets stuffed full of things we don't actually need.
Huh. A common experience, I suspect.
Probably. But the other half is the explosion in easy consumer credit. The data is really striking there, too.
Like what?
Well, the average American household thinks 6 credit cards, averaging around $9,000 in debt.
Wow.
And the really worrying part, 7 out of 10 households using credit just to cover basic living expenses, food, clothing.
Necessities. So you've got this societal backdrop, incredibly low savings, skyrocketing debt.
Yeah.
And then you zoom in on the personal level. Why is it so hard for you, the listener, to save even a little? Or say no to that impulse purchase? Stick to the diet, the exercise routine.
It feels like a personal failing, doesn't it? But these numbers, they suggest it's something deeper.
It's that classic road to hell paved with good intentions. We have rational goals. We make plans, say, for retirement, eat healthier, start that big project.
Mm-hmm. But the immediate pull, comfort, pleasure, or just avoiding discomfort, it just wins out in the moment.
And this is where Ariely introduces that core conflict.
Yeah.
Sacrificing those valuable long-term goals for immediate, often pretty fleeting gratification.
That's procrastination right there.
Yeah.
And he roots it in the difference between our cool state and our hot state.
Explain that a bit.
Sure. Your cool state is when you're rational, calm, looking at the big picture. That's the self that sets the goal, right? To save money or exercise.
Okay.
Your hot state is when you're under the influence of emotion or temptation. You're hungry, tired, stressed. You see a flashy ad.
Mm-hmm.
And that self makes the decision in the moment about the donut or the online purchase, whatever it is.
And those two selves are just fundamentally at war. Ariely, as a professor, he saw this play out all the time with his students.
Oh, yeah. They'd start the semester full of great intentions, right? Planning to be organized, stay ahead.
But then the hot state kicks in. Needing to socialize, being tired, just wanting to relax. That takes over.
Leading straight to those predictable panic late-night cramming sessions.
Fueled by caffeine and regret. We've all been there.
Which, yeah, rarely produces your best work.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
So he and a colleague, they designed this clever experiment with his students to test different ways of setting deadlines, to see what actually worked against procrastination.
Right. They structured a class with 3 major papers spread over a 12-week semester. These papers were really crucial for the final grade.
And they divided the students into 3 different conditions, 3 groups.
Okay.
In the first condition, class 1, students could submit the papers anytime before the end of the semester. Irrity.
There's always a but.
There's always a but. They had to set their own specific deadline for each paper, and they had to do it by the end of the first week.
Okay, so commit early.
Commit early.
Yeah.
And once those deadlines were set, they were locked in. Late papers got a penalty 1% off the grade per day.
Ouch. So interestingly, one student immediately asked, well, given this, wouldn't it make sense to just pick the last possible date for everything?
Right, maximize flexibility.
And Airly apparently told him, yeah, you're welcome to if you think that's the best strategy for you.
Which, if you are a perfectly rational economic agent, totally self-controlled, you would do that, right? Maximize your options.
But if you know you struggle with putting things off,
Then maybe you'd use those self-imposed deadlines with the penalty built in to kind of force your future self.
you're procrastinating future self.
Exactly. To get things done earlier.
Yeah.
It's a tool, right, for pre-commitment.
Right. So that was class 1, self-set deadlines with consequences.
Okay. Class 2 is the opposite extreme, complete flexibility.
Oh, boy.
No deadlines at all for any paper until the very, very last day of the semester. Total freedom.
Sounds appealing on the surface, maybe? Terrifying in practice if you know yourself.
Right. And the third class, class 3, this was the dictatorial approach, as he calls it.
Uh-huh.
Airly simply dictated 3 specific, equally spaced deadlines. Week 4, week 8, week 12. That's it. No negotiation, no flexibility, just here are the dates.
Total external structure imposed from above.
Okay.
All right, listener, put yourself in their shoes for a second. Based on what you know about procrastination, maybe your own habits, which of these 3 classes do you think ended up with the best final grades on those papers?
Was it the ones who set their own deadlines? The ones with total freedom? Or the ones with the rigid dictated deadlines?
And who do you think did the worst? Take a guess.
The results. Well, they were incredibly clear. And maybe a bit counterintuitive given how much we value freedom.
What did they find?
When they looked at the final grades, the students in the class with the 3 firm dictated deadlines, they achieved the highest grades.
Wow. The most restrictive condition actually led to the best outcome.
Exactly. And the class with no deadlines at all. Total freedom.
Let me guess. Lowest grades. Yep. Unsurprisingly, perhaps. They had the worst grades. Total freedom resulted in the lowest performance.
Ouch. That hurts the freedom lover in me.
Hmm.
Okay. And the middle group. The class where students set their own deadlines.
They finished squarely in the middle, both for their paper grades and their overall class grades.
This experiment is really powerful because it just nails some key points, doesn't it?
Absolutely. First, obviously, students do procrastinate. Big shocker there.
Oh, yeah.
But the crucial part is how these different structures really impacted that tendency.
Right. It showed that tightly restricting freedom, imposing that external structure, the dictatorial approach, was actually the most effective way to combat procrastination, at least in this setup.
It forced them essentially to manage their time better.
And what I find fascinating is that simply offering the tool for pre-commitment, letting students set their own deadlines with penalties,
Yeah.
that actually led to better grades than having no structure at all.
Right. It suggests people kind of recognize their own weakness, their tendency to procrastinate.
And they'll use mechanisms to fight it, if you give them the chance.
It shows that people want to overcome it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you give them a way to commit their future selves, they'll often take it.
But it also shows that self-set wasn't as good as dictated. Why do you think that was?
Well, Airely's analysis is basically that not everyone fully understands how much they're likely to procrastinate.
Okay.
Or even if they do recognize it, they might not be great at designing the most effective structure for themselves.
Right.
So while many students in that self-set group did space their deadlines out well, and they performed pretty much like the dictated group, the students who didn't space them effectively, maybe they bunched them all up at the end, like that one student suggested.
Yeah.
They pulled the average down significantly.
So they failed to use the pre-commitment tool effectively to save their future self from that hot state crunch at the end.
Exactly. It implies that, recognizing your weakness is step 1. Using pre-commitment tools is step 2. But maybe those tools are most effective when the structure is expertly designed and maybe even externally imposed.
Okay, so that's students and term papers.
Yeah.
How does this translate then to the messy reality of our everyday lives, far beyond the classroom?
Oh, it translates directly to almost any area where we have long-term goals that require some kind of short-term sacrifice or maybe doing unpleasant tasks.
Well-
Health and money are 2 prime examples Airely focuses on.
Okay, let's take healthcare first. Airly points out the fundamental problem there. We know preventive medicine Regular checkups, essential screenings like colonoscopies, mammograms, cholesterol tests.
We know it's vital for long-term health, and ultimately it's more cost-effective than waiting for a crisis.
Right. But
Hmm?
these things are often inconvenient, they can be uncomfortable, or just plain unpleasant.
Yeah, fasting for blood tests, the procedures themselves. Our hot state just wants to avoid that discomfort now.
So we procrastinate. We put off the necessary steps, even when our future health is literally on the line.
It's a huge problem. Now, if we applied the findings from that deadline experiment, one extreme solution is the dictatorial approach.
Meaning,
Mandatory checkups, health police, making sure you comply.
whoa, that sounds pretty dystopian.
It does, though Arinli does draw a parallel to other mandates society accepts, for the greater good or even our own good.
Like seatbelt laws?
Yeah, seatbelt laws, jaywalking fines, smoking bans in public places. We already accept some loss of freedom for collective well-being or even individual safety.
True. But are health decisions too personal for that kind of mandate? It raises big questions.
It certainly does. Profound questions about personal autonomy versus public health outcomes, or even just helping ourselves achieve our own long-term goals. Where do you draw that line?
Tough one. But what about the middle ground from the experiment? That self-imposed commitment with a penalty. Could that work in healthcare?
He proposes thinking about it this way. What if your doctor required, say, a financial deposit for appointments or tests? Like a $100 deposit for that cholesterol test. Fully refundable, but only if you show up on time.
Would knowing you'd lose that money make you more likely to actually go through with the unpleasant task?
That's the question. And would you proactively sign up for that kind of system if it were offered? Maybe a larger deposit for a more involved screening, like a colonoscopy?
So using our aversion to loss basically as a pre-commitment mechanism.
Exactly. You're using a tool you opt into because you recognize your own tendency to put off uncomfortable but necessary things.
He also uses this fantastic analogy from the car maintenance world to illustrate another way to tackle procrastination for tasks like healthcare.
Oh yeah, the Ford versus Honda story.
Right. Explain that.
Well, he recounts how Ford was really struggling to get customers back to their dealerships for routine maintenance.
Why?
Because Ford cars back then had these maintenance schedules that were incredibly complex, really fragmented. Like, change this specific bolt at 3,602 miles, check that fluid at 7,150 miles.
A nightmare for anyone to track.
Totally. Impossible for customers to remember, hard for service advisors to even explain. It was just a recipe for procrastination.
So people just didn't do it.
Pretty much. Meanwhile, Honda was doing something totally different. They simplified and bundled their maintenance
How so?
into predictable, common intervals across all their models. Every 5,000 miles, 10,000, 15,000. They had clear packaged service menus, like the 15,000-mile service.
Making it incredibly easy for customers to understand what needed doing and when. Simple.
Super simple. Now, Ford's engineers initially argued, well, Honda's approach isn't as precise for optimal vehicle longevity.
Right. Technically, maybe not perfect.
But the winning argument, the one that changed things, was brilliant and simple. It's far better for consumers to actually service their vehicles at somewhat simplified, maybe slightly compromised, but easy to remember intervals.
Than for them not to service them at all.
Exactly. Which was happening with the complex Ford schedules. Procrastination meant missed maintenance.
So Ford eventually adopted the bundling approach.
Yep. And guess what? Their service base saw a huge increase in business. It was a win-win. Good for the customer's car, good for the company's bottom line.
Okay, so Airily asks, why not apply this kind of thinking to healthcare?
Right. Could we bundle essential screenings and checkups into simpler, more predictable packages or intervals? Things that are easy to remember and manage?
So make comprehensive physicals, age-appropriate screenings, all that stuff, feel less like a complex list of disjointed tasks and more like, I don't know, ordering a value meal or something. A simple, understood package you just do at the right time.
It sounds maybe a little silly, but the core idea is that simplified, bundled intervals are just far more likely to get done than complex, erratic ones.
Good enough done on time is way better than perfect but infinitely procrastinated.
Precisely.
Absolutely. Okay, now let's bridge this over to savings and spending. This is a direct application of that procrastination problem we started with, looking at the national debt data.
Yeah, the personal struggle with impulse spending and getting into debt.
Yeah.
That's where the hot state often just completely overrides the cool state's financial goals.
For sure. Airily touches on some existing kind of home remedies people use to fight this.
Like the classic ice glass method.
Exactly, freezing your credit card in a block of ice. So you literally have a physical cooling off period before you can make an impulse buy.
A physical barrier to delay that immediate gratification. It's simple, but hey, maybe effective for some people.
He also mentions the phenomenon of online debt blogging, where people publicly share their debt struggles, sometimes called self-shame.
Right, sites like poorthanyou.com or bloggingawaydebt.com were early examples of this.
It's a way to create external accountability, isn't it? By making a private struggle public.
It is, however, as Airly notes, this is often a reflection after the overspending has already happened.
Right, it's not really a mechanism to curb the spending in the moment of temptation.
Exactly, which brings us back to needing tools that work at the point of decision.
And this leads to his fascinating concept for a self-control credit card.
Yeah, explicitly designed to give people the ability to pre-commit, similar to that self-set deadlines experiment.
How would it work?
Well, this card would allow users, when they're in their rational cool state, to set customized spending limits in advance.
Customize how?
You could define limits by category, say, groceries, entertainment, clothing, or by store, or even by time of day.
Whoa! So you could literally say $20 maximum per week on coffee, or $500 max every 3 months on clothes, or maybe no online shopping between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m.
Exactly. That level of granular control you set for yourself beforehand.
That's incredible. And what happens if you hit a limit or try to break a rule you set?
You'd choose the consequence beforehand, too. The card could simply be rejected,
Okay.
or you could opt for a self-imposed penalty, like automatically transferring a set amount to a charity you don't like, or maybe to a friend, or even just into your own long-term savings account.
Huh. Taxing yourself for breaking your own rules.
Pretty much. It could also build in mandatory cooling off periods for large purchases or trigger automatic notifications based on your preset rules.
The whole concept is using technology to build in these kinds of governors or like time release mechanisms into our spending.
That our rational selves wish we had in those impulsive moments.
Yeah, and it helps you act according to the plans you made when you were thinking clearly.
So Airly actually took this idea to a major bank. He presented the whole problem of widespread consumer debt and pitched how his self-control card could be a real solution, helping people regain control.
And how did that go?
Well, he felt he was connecting with the bankers. He said many of them had seen friends or family members struggle deeply with debt. They got the problem.
Okay.
But when he pitched the core idea, a product that literally helped people spend less, the bankers were apparently stunned.
Stunned. Why? Oh, right. Their business model.
Exactly. Their whole model relied on people carrying balances and paying interest. He mentions a staggering $17 billion a year in interest revenue just for their company.
So a card that helped people avoid interest in debt. That's a direct conflict.
A huge conflict of interest. Why would they build a product that could potentially gut their main revenue stream?
Makes sense from their perspective, sadly.
Yeah.
Did he have a counter?
He did. He argued that the credit card market was saturated, undifferentiated. Everyone offered points or miles. Offering a card that was explicitly the good guy card, one that genuinely helped customers control their spending and even save, that could be a revolutionary way to attract loyal customers, a huge differentiator.
His proposition was basically stand out by actually helping your customers build better financial habits. That could capture significant market share in the long run.
Yeah, be the bank that helps, not the one that profits from struggles.
And the bankers.
They seem genuinely excited by the concept, at least from a marketing standpoint. The meeting ended really positively, lots of enthusiasm, promises to follow up. But as Airly recounts, they never did call back. Seriously. His speculation. Either the sheer size of the potential revenue loss from reduced interest payments was just too terrifying for them to actually pursue, or maybe the bankers themselves simply procrastinated on following up on this revolutionary, potentially difficult idea.
Oh, the irony. The ultimate, perhaps, example of predictable irrationality winning out right there.
It really ties all these threads together, doesn't it?
It really does. Whether we're talking about term papers or health checkups or managing money, we face this fundamental challenge, prioritizing immediate comfort or gratification over our long-term well-being.
And the recurring solution, or at least partial solution, that emerges from all of Airly's examples is the power of pre-commitment mechanisms.
And structure.
Right. Whether that structure is externally imposed and rigid, like the dictated deadlines that worked best in the experiment, or something you choose to opt into for yourself, like the self-set deadlines, or the deposit for a doctor's visit, or those bundled services, or that hypothetical self-control credit card. Giving ourselves the opportunity, or sometimes being given the opportunity to commit up front to the path we actually want to take.
Yeah.
And ideally adding some kind of consequence for deviating, that can be incredibly effective, even if it's not a perfect silver bullet for everyone.
And simple examples of this, things we might already use without thinking of it this way, are like setting up automatic paycheck deductions for savings.
Right, takes the decision out of your hands each payday.
Or scheduling workouts with a friend. You've built in a commitment and external accountability.
Exactly. These are all tools that acknowledge our weaker, impulsive selves, that hot state.
And help our rational, future-focused, cool state self win the day more often. So we've taken quite a deep dive here into Dan O'Reilly's insights on procrastination and self-control, looking at national trends, that revealing classroom experiment, and these real-world applications in health and finance.
And hopefully, understanding these predictable ways we sometimes act against our own best interests, that's the first step toward building strategies that actually work for us.
Definitely. And that leaves us with a powerful final thought, really, a question for you, the listener, to consider as we wrap up.
Okay.
O'Reilly's experiment clearly showed that the most externally structured, the seemingly least free environment led to the best outcomes for those students.
Right. The dictated deadlines.
So, thinking about your own life, how much freedom are you actually willing to give up? Or maybe, what kind of external structure are you willing to build in or opt into for potentially significant long-term gains in areas like your health or your finances?
Yeah, how can you proactively design systems, maybe even fun ones, to make it easier for your future self to succeed, knowing your own tendencies?
It's a really complex balance, isn't it, between autonomy and effectiveness?
It absolutely is. But recognizing our predictable irrationality, like O'Reilly shows us, is just key to finding those strategies that might actually work.
Absolutely fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.
It was great. And there are so many more surprising insights into our predictably irrational human behavior to explore in future deep dives.
We really look forward to continuing this journey of discovery with you.
Definitely.